This video is sponsored by the United States Naval Institute Press. Continue watching to see how you can save either 25 or up to 40% on their fantastic collection. What do a mock raid on Dayton, Ohio in the United States, the detonation of the first Soviet nuclear bomb, the Korean War and the Cuban Missile Crisis have in common? Well, they mark the rise and fall of one of the most powerful fighting forces the world has ever seen. That, of course, being Strategic Air Command, or SAC for short, because of course it's a military organization, so we need that acronym. Now, SAC was established in order to deliver strategic and nuclear weapons during the Cold War, and its history is very much intertwined with the concept of nuclear deterrence. Who made it into the force that it became, and how do you actually go about creating nuclear deterrence? It's a fascinating topic, and some of the answers might very well surprise you. So, welcome back to Military Aviation History. I'm Chris, and let's talk about that joyous subject of nuclear deterrence. In January 1949, the people of Dayton, Ohio were witness to an unbelievable aerial spectacle. Throughout the day, the USAF, so the United States Air Force, I nearly said Army Air Force, it was no longer the Army Air Force at this point, it was the United States Air Force, was conducting mock bombing runs on the city as well as the airfields right next to it, and in fact one of them being right in the center. But what looked very impressive from the ground was in the air an unmitigated disaster. The Dayton raid showed how far the USAF had fallen in the 4 years following World War II. 303 bombing runs, nearly 2/3 were more than 7,000 feet off target. The average error was 10,090 feet. Such an error, even with an atomic bomb over Hiroshima, would have left the target unscathed. Roughly 5 months later, a subsequent, smaller scale mission showed little improvement. Now, the Dayton raid was a really rude wake-up call, and SAC would take some years before it actually showed definitive improvement in its capabilities. But at the same time, you had the detonation of the first Soviet bomb, that's Joe 1, and the Korean War, which both proved to be shocks to the US, causing the fear in the US, as the saying goes, that they won the war, but they were losing the peace. And yes, I know the US wasn't the only one to win the war, but you know, that's how the saying goes. So let's just roll with it and keep those hands off the keyboard, please. Joe 1 and the North Korean invasion aided in the implementation of paranoid, but generally benevolently intended deeds that came to define the duration of the Cold War. Had the Korean War not occurred, perhaps the Cold War would not have become the conflict generations knew it to be. In the late 1940s, SAC's chances of fulfilling their task were about as high as you winning the Kentucky Derby on a lame donkey. The problems ran deep. Material, personnel, basing, everything was inadequate. Authorized to have 43,000 personnel, SAC only had 37,000 in its ranks. Furthermore, those who left the service during the drawback were usually the highly skilled personnel, especially aircraft maintainers and repair specialists. A large proportion of those who remained in the command, which heavily relied on new technology, were unskilled personnel. Some of you might very well be familiar with the story of the B-46 Peacemaker, which is still such an incredibly ironic name considering, the role this aircraft would have played if the Cold War had gotten hot, as well as the B-47 Stratojet. Lots of problems there, something for a future episode. Yet a decade after Joe 1 and the Korean War, SAC was standing there as a completely transformed fighting force. The Cuban Missile Crisis saw the most powerful fighting force ever constructed in the history of warfare reach the peak of its readiness to go to war. Within 24 hours of the decision to act on the crisis, SAC had 1,436 bombers and 145 missiles ready to launch at a moment's notice. At SAC's peak readiness on the 4th of November, the command had almost 3,000 nuclear weapons to promise the Soviet Union complete destruction should deterrence fail. While in DEFCON 2, SAC could have launched 92.5% of its weapon systems within 1 hour. So how did SAC then go from being a rundown force that would have managed the incredible feat of missing with a nuclear bomb to being able to deploy close to 3,000 of those bad boys within 24 to 48 hours? Curtis LeMay, of course, he is known for his previous service in World War II, especially in the Pacific, and he's always remembered as the man who made SAC SAC. LeMay left SAC in a much different condition than he had found it. By the time he left for Washington in the summer of 1957, SAC had become essentially the command he set about to build when he arrived in 1948. The command possessed the ability to quickly carry out a large-scale nuclear war in a fairly successful manner. Curtis LeMay certainly deserves a lot of credit. What he has done for SAC, building it up from the force that it was into what it became, is really a case study in how you take a rundown force and you transform it, and it then really becomes a potent and well-functioning machine. But it wasn't just him. There's another man, for example, who is closely intertwined with the history of SAC, its policies, as well as the concept of deterrence. And that man was General Thomas Power. Now, you might not have heard about him. In fact, that's very, very likely, because in most accounts, General Power is completely glossed over, dismissed, or ridiculed even. Historians have succumbed to two different but serious errors when considering General Power. First, popular accounts have portrayed Power as a tyrannical sadist, the living embodiment of everything wrong with both nuclear weapons and the military mind. Second, academic accounts recall Power as a carbon copy of Curtis LeMay. He emerges as LeMay's right-hand man, bested by the ultimate weapon, the ICBM, prompting SAC's slow decline into irrelevance as LeMay's crown jewel tarnished into a plodding, bureaucratic freak show. There are few that spoke of Power in flattering tones. Power had frequent, even public clashes with administrators, consultants, politicians about the concept of deterrence, and he had a talent for saying, shall we say, incredibly quotable sentences, which is of course something that journalists and anecdotes and historians love because, it builds up a narrative. While I don't want to be doing that now, I do want to show at least one of these anecdotes to give you an idea of the sort of reputation this man had. In 1960, a civilian RAND consultant briefed SAC commanders on a new concept called nuclear counterforce. Counterforce's key concept was restraint in nuclear warfare. When Power heard this, the general's reaction was clear. Why do we want to restrain ourselves? Why are you so concerned about saving their lives? The whole idea is to kill the bastards. Look, at the end of the war, if there are 2 Americans and 1 Russian, we win. Now, before we go on, I just want to make this very clear. I'm not going to be defending Power here or make some case of the military is always right, like some corn dog holding, chest pumping macho. What I want to talk about is a little bit sort of this disagreement between LeMay, Power, and SAC, as well as the civilian administrators, the consultants, the politicians, and even other military branches, and talk about that concept of deterrence. Because when you break it down, there's essentially 2 ways of looking at it. And the argument that SAC had with LeMay and Power is that deterrence is a concept that shouldn't really be just seen as a passive means, but that should also include proactive measures, which includes options like preemptive or rather first strikes. While deterrence was traditionally understood to mean the active threat of war to prevent conflict, LeMay seemingly applied the term to the execution of a preemptive mission itself. LeMay's usage suggests an interest in correlating the concept of the prevention of war with attacking the enemy's offensive force first. For LeMay, starting a war to prevent a larger war was a worthwhile venture. If one could be deterred, all the better. For the other side, nuclear war was unthinkable due to mutually assured destruction. Even though we have these weapons, no one is going to use them because as soon as you use them, the other people are going to use theirs. And that in itself was considered deterrence. A RAND consultant argued that winning a nuclear war was simply nonsense and proclaimed that the real value would be lost once they were used. And hence, nuclear weapons required thinking about targeting strategy in a way entirely different from what generals were used to. So on the surface level, it looks like these views are actually somewhat compatible, but once you start breaking it down, you start realizing that they come from a completely different place, from a completely different perspective, and the capabilities that are involved in creating both sets of deterrence are vastly different. So let's have a closer look at that. But first, as always, I like to give reading recommendations with my videos, and today's come with a very special discount courtesy of today's sponsor, the United States Naval Institute Press. Check out the link in the description below for my official reading list of the United States Naval Institute Press. If you apply the code MILAVHIS, that's MILAVHIS, on checkout when buying any of those books, you will get a 25% discount on them. I collected quite a few books there, which I highly recommend, and the list will also grow in the future. Alternatively, there's also the option to become a subscription member of the Naval Institute Press, and that will give you an automatic 40% discount on all book purchases. You can get some fantastic books. For example, on my reading list, you will find Trevor Albertson's Winning Armageddon. This is a fantastic book about how SAC got set up, and especially the role that LeMay played. And building on top of that, I can highly recommend Brent Ziarnick's To Rule the Sky to talk a little bit more about what happened with SAC down the line, as well as the role of General Power. And if General Power interests you, and he should because he's a man of very strong opinions, do check out Ziarnick's 21st Century Power. First of all, such a great, fantastic book title. But second of all, here you will find not only just a look at this man, but also you will find a lot of the writing that Power has done himself, where he explains his logic. And actually, this makes for some really interesting reading as well. So do check that out in the description below. And now back to the content. Now let us turn to that traditional concept of deterrence, right? There, basically, in a nutshell, it is you have nuclear weapons, so you have deterrence. So the capability translates into that end goal of deterrence. So you take the capabilities and you go from the end goal, which essentially means that you take the nukes and you have deterrence. Now, considering nuclear weapons just by their basic force, this concept of mutually assured destruction is sound. Yet there are some problems associated with this approach, because it can result, for example, in an over-reliance on best-case scenarios, so you are basically overestimating your own force or underestimating an adversary's ability to counter it. And you're also superimposing your own assumption on what your deterrence value is on a potential adversary. And that's an opinion that that adversary might not share. Or at the same time, you might also be aligning your goals more along the capabilities you have rather than that you want or need. The problem is that deterrence is more than just number of weapons. It's also about reconnaissance, defensive measures, command and control, and so much more, as you will see. For example, LeMay made a case that reconnaissance was actually a part, an integral part even, of deterrence. We must locate the Tupolev force at the outset of hostilities and maintain surveillance of its movements if Strategic Air Command is to deter the launching of an attack against the United States and United Kingdom. Then also consider General Power, who talked about civilian defense and other ways to mitigate damage from nuclear attack as being part and parcel of deterrence as well. Of course, when he did that, he did it in his own way. After a briefer reported that approximately 100 million people from the Soviet Union could be killed, Power interrupted the speaker. I just want to say that this assumes that Ivan just stands there in the open and stares up at the fallout. Thus, for SAC, the approach was completely different. They actually flipped this discussion around and said, okay, what is the end goal that we want? Deterrence. Okay, so what capabilities do we need to get that end goal? So at this point, you're taking the end goal and you're looking to achieve this end goal, what capabilities do I need? And that end goal is, of course, deterrence. So that means how many nukes do we need and what are the capabilities of these nukes and what capabilities are attached to these nukes. So you're starting out not with asking what you have, but what you want to achieve, and then you backtrack from there. Of course, this also has its own share of problems, as such an approach might very well result in the continuous undervaluing of your existing capabilities as not enough, or you're overvaluing enemy capabilities even if those capabilities are actually inferior, or you're overemphasizing nuclear capabilities over conventional ones. In a nutshell, the way that SAC calculated its capabilities based on the intended end goal was this. They asked themselves the question, what is the probability of destruction that is required per target? And how can SAC achieve that probability? You can do this by breaking down the process into 4 steps. Step number 1, target identification. Make a list of all the targets and sort them by priority. If your priority is to limit the first strike or second strike potential of an assumed enemy, you would rank military targets like missile silos, strategic bases, command and control as being more important than army bases or transportation and logistics or even industrial targets. Step 2 then is assurance of success. You establish the margin of error you can accept per target. Now each target you identify will have a margin of error per weapon system you employ against it. For example, a weapon aimed at a large open target like a strategic bomber base might have a much higher chance of successfully knocking the target out compared to a much smaller, hardened underground missile silo. Yet the silo might actually be more important to take out because it can react way faster. You then have step 3, kill probability. Given the different weapon systems you have available, you'll need to wargame each war system's kill probability from the order to launch that was given to the actual detonation. There's a couple of phases attached to this, so let's consider those in turn. Pre-launch, so failures in communication or confusion caused by unclear orders. Then you have the launch. Technical failures could factor in here, or operational readiness. You have the transit. Once again, technical failures could happen. Computated failures, interception by the enemy. Then you have final delivery, which could also be influenced by technical failures or interception, or in fact also failures in reconnaissance. And then you have detonation, where technical failures or an insufficient yield for the target or bad intelligence or accuracy are all factored in. Then you move on to step 4. You aggregate the information of the previous steps. You need to establish the required number of weapon systems per target. So let me give you an example. Assumption number 1, let us assume that the destructive potential of a weapon is equal across all possible targets. Assumption number 2, this weapon system that is capable of destroying the target has a 50% failure rate between pre-launch and detonation. So the obvious solution at this point might seem, well, if one weapon has 50% chance, then why don't we just send 2, and that will then factor in this failure rate. Well, the problem here is that if you're sending 2, the mathematical kill probability is not 100%. It's actually 75%, since there is still a 25% chance both weapons will fail. And kill probability only goes up as you start adding more weapons. You're sitting at roughly 87% for 3 weapons, 93% for 4 weapons, 96% for 5 weapons, and 99% for 7 weapons. So now let us return to step number 2, assurance of success. If your acceptable assurance of success is low, for example for an army base, a 47% kill probability might be acceptable. But it is likely that the assurance of success for a missile silo needs to be very high. So you can already double the weapon systems used from 2 to 4 compared to the army base. That gives you a 93% chance on the missile silo, but that still also leaves a 7% chance that it stays operational, at least mathematically speaking. Of course, a similar calculation has to be made from the other side, so from your adversary's side, but we'll just ignore that here for the sake of simplicity. This is then how General Power countered accusations that there are too many nuclear weapons in the US arsenal because of the problems that are associated with their delivery and the required kill probability. He said that SAC was not trying to overkill the targets. On the contrary, he questioned whether the overkill actually existed in practical terms because of those problems associated with the delivery of the weapons. And he called this the myth of the overkill. Now, if only my high school math teacher knew that 2 decades down the line his lessons would help me calculate a simple kill probability scenario using nuclear weapons. Herr Hiebsch, falls Sie das hier sehen, es ist selbst bei einem verlorenen Fall wie mir dank Ihnen noch etwas hängen geblieben. Vielen Dank. Administrators, consultants, politicians, other military branches, everyone understood deterrence. A slightly different perspective on those things, but they all understood the value of deterrence. I want to make this very clear. But what they were generally not convinced of, and what they were generally opposed to, because they came from their own perspective, where they had different issues to worry about, like very quickly, for example, the budget, they were opposed to that utter and overwhelming firepower that SAC was advocating for. Because in their minds, as soon as the Soviet Union had achieved some sort of parity, maybe not in absolute terms, but had enough nukes to pose a real significant threat, as soon as those nukes start flying, does it really matter how many number of nukes are involved in the whole thing? Because good luck finding another planet. SAC understood this as well, but for them, deterrence was more than just nuclear assured destruction, because they actually had to plan out these scenarios. They were the ones that had to deliver the nuclear weapons if something happened, and they were the ones that were developing offensive as well as defensive capabilities that could potentially change the nuclear landscape. And so the logic of their craft just didn't allow them just to rely on the capability of nuclear weapons in themselves. And you see this very clearly, for example, with the emergence of ICBMs, which were also co-developed by SAC, because these were considered by many as sort of this ultimate weapon to either reset US dominance or to provide a cost-effective means of deterrence. But SAC completely disagreed. To power, the ICBM was just another weapon that, however formidable, had its advantages and disadvantages, and these characteristics gave it a unique and valuable place in the SAC arsenal and American war plans. The hope of developing weapons against which there is no defense and which ensures the defeat of an enemy is as old as man himself. The same ingenuity which permits man to conceive of radically new ways of fighting his enemies also permits him to conceive the effective means of defending himself. SAC wanted firepower, they wanted flexibility, and they wanted a diverse set of offensive and defensive measures in order to give the deterrence to the government, or rather the country, that SAC thought the government or the country needed. Just that SAC, at the same time, whilst they were doing that, also had to account for all the practical details from, well, launch over to delivery, as well as reconnaissance and all the things that actually go into building up that set of deterrence. And that is something that, well, maybe the administrators, maybe the consultants, and maybe other military branches really didn't have to account for that much, because they came at this question from a completely different place. And I also want to make this very clear. This really was not a fight between civilians and the military, as it is often popularly portrayed. The other military branches, for example the US Navy, were also very critical of the USAF's idea of using a 90% assurance rate for the kill probability when it comes to every single target, because that requires such a huge range of resources that is drawing those resources, the money and the brain power, the manpower and so on, away from other capabilities that the United States also needed. And the discussions when we look at, for example, the Single Integrated Operations Plan, which is called SIOP, because once again we need acronyms, show this very clearly. SIOP was the US nuclear plan or war plan in case something happened between 1963 and 2003. No, 1961, 2003. 1961, 2003. That's it. Power believed that the forces assigned to the Single Integrated Operations Plan should be programmed and that excess force should be used in a plan to add flexibility. The Navy thought that the effort necessary to reach 90% destruction assurance rates for each individual target in the SIOP was too expensive and required delivering too many nuclear weapons. Today, the SIOP is known not as a triumph of military planning and the linchpin of credibility of the US nuclear deterrent in the Cold War. It is instead synonymous with military mendacity, SAC zealotry, and Air Force extravagance. I leave it to you to have the final say. What do you think about nuclear deterrence? What do you think about these two positions? What do you think about SAC's approach, about the civilian approach? Do you have anything to add, contribute, or anything to say about the subject? Put it in the comments section below. I'd be interested to read what you have to say. Make sure you visit the description below to see, first of all, the sources that I've used in the making of this video. I've posted them there as always, but also to make sure that you take advantage of that 25 to 40% discount on the Naval Institute Press's collection. It's a fantastic selection. I highly encourage you to have a look and get some books that you're interested in. They have a lot of aviation stuff and they have a lot of naval stuff as well. Although that's more about, targets. Get the aviation stuff. No, just get what you want. It's a fantastic selection and I highly encourage you to make advantage of that discount. I also want to thank my patrons and channel members for the absolutely fantastic support they give me and this channel, and I will see some of you in the next Discord call as well, so looking forward to that. I also want to thank Andrew for you reviewing the script, of course also the Naval Institute Press for sponsoring this video and also providing some of the visuals that you've seen throughout this video. And as always, all of you, thank you very much for watching. I wish all of you a great day, surround yourself with friends, some good vibes, and see you in the sky.